Hey guys, we're taking our time tonight. The world outside has already slowed down. Yellow squares are fading in the windows of high-rise buildings. Someone will still be flipping through the tape. Someone will be late for the last tram. And you are already lying down, feeling your body slowly becoming heavy. Silence and the echo of the day are mixed in the air, and it is time to surrender to philosophy that sounds like a lullaby. But let's be honest, you would probably never last. A whole night alone with your thoughts without any distraction. A person would simply crumble under the weight of their own ideas. That is why we are looking for the words of Plato, Seneca, or Buddha. They become soft pillows for the mind. So, before you settle down, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I am doing here. And I will be glad if you write in the comments where exactly you are listening to me now and what time it is. This will create our own night map of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a quiet background hum, and let's dive into today's journey together. You're drifting again. Another day has passed, and you can't quite point to where it went. Did you really live it? Or did it slip through the cracks of phone notifications, half-remembered conversations, and tasks you completed without noticing? That's the curse of our age. Days bleed into each other, like drops of coffee spreading on the tablecloth, leaving a stain but no substance. You tell yourself you're busy. Everyone does. Yet the strange thing that being busy often looks suspiciously like wasting time, just decorated with meetings and emails. Remember that Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius? He complained about the same thing nearly 2,000 years ago. Even as ruler of the most powerful empire in the world, he wrote that men are strangely good at wasting life, as if they had endless supply in their pocket. And here you are, centuries later, doing the same. You scroll, you binge, you multitask, your way into exhaustion. It's not your fault entirely. Modern life is designed like a casino. No windows, no clocks, just blinking machines asking for your attention. Whole industries profit from your inability to notice how much time evaporates. The problem is subtle. Wasting life isn't always about doing nothing. Often, it's about doing the wrong things with alarming dedication. You can work 12-hour days and still feel hollow. You can achieve small victories, answering every email, folding every sock, collecting every loyalty point from the supermarket, and still suspect that your real life is sitting in the corner, smoking quietly, waiting for you to notice. If you pause, the truth can be frightening. You realize that you don't actually know what you're moving toward. You're busy moving, but not toward yourself. It's like being on a treadmill in an airport. Lots of steps, no destination. And if you ever stop to think about it, your chest tightens, because the silence reminds you of everything postponed. This is where Jung enters like an unexpected guest at a noisy party. Imagine you're laughing too loud, drink in hand, surrounded by people you don't really know, when suddenly a quiet old man taps you on the shoulder and asks, "Do you even know who you are?" That's Carl Jung for you. While Freud analyzed your childhood, Jung wanted to know about the parts of yourself you keep locked away, the hidden architecture of your soul. What's truly eerie is how accurate he was. He claimed that most people don't live their lives at all. Instead, they live imitations, programs handed to them by parents, society, and culture. That's why you end up chasing jobs you don't like, relationships you can't grow in, and possessions that gather dust. It's not because you're weak, it's because you never learned to distinguish your authentic path from the borrowed ones. Here's a quirky historical fact. Jung himself once collected a set of tiny carved figurines as a child. He played with them secretly in his attic, feeling that they were deeply important, though he couldn't explain why. Later, as an adult, he realized they were his first encounter with the inner symbolic world that shaped his psychology. A grown man, haunted by little toys. It sounds absurd, but it's the absurdities that often reveal us most. So here you are, life running away, distractions multiplying like rabbits, and the faint suspicion that you haven't even met yourself yet. Historians still argue whether the 20th century was the most anxious era of all time. But one thing is certain, it produced thinkers like Jung, because anxiety demanded explanation. As you lie there now, feeling your breath slow, your eyes flickering heavy, imagine that Jung has pulled up a chair beside your bed. He doesn't scold you for wasting your time. He simply asks the question no distraction can drown out. Are you living your life, or is your life quietly living you? The question hangs in the air like the hum of the fan in your room. You think you've got an answer, but then it slips away, the way dreams vanish when you open your eyes. Maybe you are living your life, but maybe you're just renting it from everyone else. Jung would say that's not unusual. He would probably lean back in his chair and murmur that most people never even notice the lease agreement, signed silently at birth, renewed every day. You avoid thinking too hard. You first encounter him in the shadows. Not literal ones, though. It sometimes feels that way, like he emerges when the lights are dim and the distractions are gone. Carl Gustav Jung, Swiss psychiatrist, born in 1875, the kind of man who dressed neatly but spoke like an oracle. At first he seems like Freud's polite sidekick, but you quickly realize he had his own kingdom, filled with strange creatures, archetypes, shadows, anima and animus. These words sound like they belong in a video game, but Jung insisted they were alive inside you. It's unsettling. You've always thought of yourself as you, singular, whole. But Jung suggests you're more like a house with secret rooms. You wander through the kitchen and living room every day, never realizing there's a locked basement door. And behind that door, well, he'd say it's the rest of you, the forgotten, the unloved, the embarrassing. You pretend it's not there, but it taps on the walls at night. The irony is that Jung didn't stumble upon these ideas in a laboratory or library. He fell into them through his own breakdown. After breaking with Freud in 1913, Jung spiraled into visions and inner voices. He drew mandalas, painted strange gods, and filled notebooks with dialogues between himself and his own subconscious. Today you'd probably get a warning from HR if you showed up to work talking to inner gods. But Jung turned it into a method. Confront the madness, and it might guide you. There's a fun detail here. Jung's famous Red Book, where he recorded his visions, wasn't even published until 2009. For nearly a century it sat locked away, whispered about like a cursed manuscript. And when it was finally revealed, it turned out to be full of psychedelic paintings and apocalyptic conversations with imaginary figures. Historians still argue whether this makes him a pioneering psychologist or just a very sophisticated doodler with too much time. But here's the part that matters for you. Jung believed that if you don't face those shadows, they will live your life for you. You think you're making choices, but you're actually following a script written by the unconscious. Ever find yourself sabotaging your own happiness? Picking the wrong person again and again? Wasting time when you swore you wouldn't? That's the unconscious pulling your strings, laughing quietly while you pretend you're in control. And this is where your night gets interesting. Because as you lie in bed, Jung is basically telling you that you're not alone in that drifting feeling. You're haunted, not by ghosts from horror movies, but by your own unlived possibilities, the job you didn't take, the creativity you abandoned at age 12, the anger you swallowed to stay polite. They're all hanging around, like an invited guests at a dinner party. What makes it worse and funnier in a bleak way is that society rewards this sleepwalking. Workplaces love you when you wear the polite mask. Friends cheer you on when you ignore your doubts. Parents beam when you choose the safe path. The unconscious is rarely questioned because it keeps the machine running. But Jung says the machine doesn't care about your soul. It will run you into the ground if you let it. Imagine walking through a dark forest at night with a lantern. You see a small circle of light, and you assume that's the whole world. But the forest extends infinitely beyond. That's your mind. The conscious part is the lantern's glow, and the rest the shadows where wolves might be hiding is the unconscious. Most people never step beyond that circle of light. You, however, are now being asked to wander a little farther. Terrifying. Absolutely necessary. Even more so. A quirky note. Jung kept a stone he carved himself in his garden at Bollingen Tower, inscribed with cryptic symbols. He treated it like a silent friend, something to remind him of his inner journey. Neighbors thought he was eccentric. You can imagine the gossip. There's Carl again, talking to his rock. But maybe he knew something they didn't. That anchoring your strange inner life in physical symbols is a way to keep sane. And you, what's your stone? Is it the sketchbook you abandoned? The playlist you keep hidden? The journal you're afraid to write in because it might tell the truth? Jung would say those are doors into the unconscious. Ignore them long enough, and they'll turn into symptoms. As the shadows deepen in your room, and the night outside turns more silent, you realize this isn't about theory. Jung's question presses closer. If you don't step into the shadows willingly, won't they eventually come for you anyway? You've been polite all day, haven't you? Smiled at your boss, adjusted your voice on the phone, nodded at the neighbor you don't actually like. That polite smile is a mask, and Carl Jung would have rolled his eyes knowingly. He had a name for it, the persona. The persona is the version of you that society wants, the one that knows how to sit straight at dinner, shake hands firmly, and laugh at the right moment during small talk. It's not fake exactly, it's a tool, like a suit you wear to a wedding. The problem is that you forget it's a suit. After years of practice, you mistake the mask for your actual face. And this is how life gets quietly wasted. You work hard, not at being yourself, but at being acceptable. At school, you're graded not on curiosity, but on obedience. At work, promotions come not to the most authentic, but to the most strategic. It makes sense. Society runs smoother when everyone wears their costumes, but you lying here in the dark, you suspect that your costume is starting to strangle you. Think about it. The polite mask doesn't actually protect you from pain. It just delays it. You avoid conflict today, but the resentment piles up in a corner, growing mold like an old sandwich in the fridge. The longer you refuse to look at it, the more it shapes your future decisions. Jung would say you are slowly letting your persona eat your soul. Here's a historical fact. In ancient Greek theatre, actors wore large masks with exaggerated expressions, so the audience could see from far away. The Latin word for mask was persona, the very term Jung borrowed. He wasn't inventing the idea from scratch. He was pointing out that your whole life can become a stage play, where you've forgotten you're an actor. The quirky detail. Jung once admitted in letters that he was afraid of being swallowed by his own public reputation. Imagine that one of the great psychologists of the 20th century worried that the image of Professor Jung would bury Carl the man. That's the danger of masks. Sometimes the costume grows teeth. And look at you, you've got masks for every occasion. The cheerful colleague, the responsible child, the witty friend who makes jokes when silence gets awkward. You switch them so quickly you barely notice. But late at night, when you finally take them off, you realize you don't quite remember what your real face looks like. What's worse is how society rewards the mask wearing. Everyone claps when you play the role well. Parents beam when you fulfill expectations. Employers cheer when you work late without complaining. It feels good until it doesn't, because deep down, you know applause fades. When the stage lights go out, you're left backstage, tired, alone, wondering why you're still in costume. Historians still argue whether Jung himself ever truly escaped his persona. Was he the explorer of the unconscious, bravely charting unknown maps, or was he just another man hiding behind intellectual authority? Maybe both. Maybe that's the whole point. No one completely escapes the mask, but if you don't at least notice it, you'll spend your one short life performing instead of living. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine you had to spend one full day without any mask at all. No polite smiles. No I'm fine, thanks. No bending your sentences to avoid conflict. Just raw you. Would you still have friends at the end of the day? Would your boss still nod approvingly? Would your parents still recognize you? The truth is uncomfortable. You'd probably lose something, but you'd gain something else. You'd get yourself back. And maybe that's the trade Jung was urging people to make. Risk disappointing the audience in order to stop disappointing the soul. As you exhale now, listening to the quiet rhythm of your own breath, you can almost feel those masks stacked up on the bedside table, like a pile of costumes after a long performance. And beneath them, there you are, unpolished, awkward, but finally real. You've taken off the mask, but what's underneath isn't always pretty. In fact, Jung warns that what you'll find there is a stranger, a shadowy figure who has been following you around for years, waiting for you to turn your head. He called it the shadow, and he didn't mean vampires or ghosts. He meant all the parts of yourself you've decided to banish because they're inconvenient, ugly, or downright embarrassing. Think of the times you've smiled while secretly envying a friend's success, or when you wanted to yell at someone but bit your tongue so hard it hurt, or when you laughed along at a joke you hated because it was easier to blend in. All those moments, they don't disappear. They just pack their bags and move into the basement of your psyche. Jung says they wait there, smoking in the dark, listening to bad radio, and plotting their revenge. Here's a historical fact. In medieval Europe, people genuinely believed that if you didn't confess your sins, demons would creep into your house. The priests might not have been Jungian analysts, but they intuited something similar. The unspoken will come back to haunt you. Suppressed shadow energy leaks out sideways, through nightmares, addictions, or that suspiciously sharp tone, a voice you use when someone asks you to smile more. The quirky detail. Jung himself wasn't immune. He once admitted that during World War I, he felt torn between his Swiss neutrality and his deep rage at the destruction around him. His shadow appeared in dreams as a brutal barbarian, smashing through civilization. Imagine being a respected psychiatrist and realizing your inner self is basically a Viking raider with blood on his beard, and you don't pretend you don't know your own raider. Maybe it comes out when you're driving and someone cuts you off. Maybe it shows up in jealousy, or in the way you secretly root for villains in movies. Or maybe it's quieter, slipping out in procrastination. You swear you'll start that important project, and then your shadow hands you the remote and whispers, "One more episode won't kill you." Historians still argue whether Jung's shadow is just another word for repressed guilt, or if it's something deeper, almost spiritual. Whatever the case, ignoring it is like ignoring the mold under the sink. It will spread, whether you look at it or not. The funny part is how the shadow loves disguises. It often shows up in the people you dislike most. That co-worker you can't stand because they're arrogant, probably a piece of your own arrogance you've shoved into the basement. The friend who seems too needy, maybe your own neediness, the one you buried because it made you feel weak. Jung would say, spot the trait that irritates you most in others, and you'll find a piece of your shadow waving back. This is where wasting your life becomes really dangerous. Because if you don't acknowledge the shadow, you spend decades fighting phantoms in other people, never realizing the battlefield is inside you. You avoid conflict, but conflict finds you. You bury desires, but they claw their way out in strange, crooked forms. Here's the big twist. The shadow isn't just bad news. Inside that basement are also the talents, joys, and passions you rejected. Maybe you loved painting as a child, but abandoned it because someone said it was impractical. Or you had a wild sense of humor that got you scolded in class. Into the basement they went. Now your shadow holds them hostage, waiting for you to notice. Imagine walking down into that basement tonight. Dust, cobwebs, broken furniture, and there, in the corner, your shadow, part monster, part wounded child. It doesn't attack you. It just stares, holding out all the things you threw away. The only question is whether you'll take them back. As the night grows deeper and the silence around you thickens, you realize Jung's point isn't just academic. If you want to stop wasting your life, you can't just polish the mask. You have to make peace with the stranger you locked away. The shadow lingers in the basement, but upstairs, another force is at work. You've been living according to blueprints you never drafted. Jung would tell you that your life is not just shaped by your family or your culture, it's also sculpted by invisible templates he called archetypes. At first glance, it sounds like mystical nonsense. Archetypes sounds like a Marvel villain or a philosophy term that professors throw around to justify their salaries. But Jung insisted they were real, not in the sense of physical objects, but in the way gravity is real. You can't touch gravity, but you feel its pull every time you trip over your shoelace. Archetypes work the same way. They are patterns of behavior, inherited psychological instincts, pushing you along paths that feel like destiny. A historical fact: the word archetype itself goes back to ancient Greek, meaning first model or original pattern. Jung borrowed it to explain why myths from different cultures, Greek, Hindu, Mauryan, seem to share the same cast of characters: heroes, wise old mentors, tricksters, devouring mothers. You'd think cultures oceans apart would tell different stories, but no, they rhyme like verses of one enormous human poem. And here comes the quirky part: Jung collected myths the way some people collect vinyl records. He saw them as playlists of the collective unconscious. Imagine him in his study, surrounded by books of fairy tales, nodding like a DJ as he connected Cinderella's glass slipper to a Buddhist parable, and then to a Native American folktale. To him, they weren't children's stories, they were roadmaps to the deepest structures of the human mind. What does this mean for you? It means your choices aren't entirely free. The roles you step into, hero, victim, wanderer, caregiver, aren't random. You're reenacting scripts that humanity has played out for thousands of years. When you fall in love, when you fight with your parents, when you dream of adventure, you're sliding into grooves worn deep by generations before you. That might sound depressing, like you're just a puppet in a very old show. But Jung would insist it's the opposite. Once you notice the pattern, you can decide whether to keep playing it or to step off the stage. It's one thing to unconsciously live out the archetype of the martyr and burn out quietly. It's another to realize what you're doing and say, you know what? Maybe I don't need to nail myself to this particular cross. Historians still argue whether Jung's archetypes are biology in disguise, instincts evolved for survival, or that they're purely cultural. The debate continues, but what matters tonight, as you lie there in half-sleep, is how clearly you see these roles in yourself. Think about how you sometimes copy other people's lives without even realizing it. You want the trendy career because everyone else does. You post the vacation photos that look suspiciously like everyone else's beach. You play the achiever, the rebel, the perfect parent, not because you chose them, but because the archetype slipped into the driver's seat while you were distracted. And here's the kicker: these roles are seductive precisely because they feel safe. They come pre-approved by culture. You don't have to invent meaning from scratch. You just plug yourself into the existing myth. But if you're not careful, your life becomes a rerun. Imagine binge-watching the same TV show for decades without realizing the remote was always in your hand. So here's a sleepy little dare. Look at your day, even just the last 24 hours. How many of your actions were genuinely yours? And how many were echoes of scripts older than you? If you can't tell, Jung would smile kindly and say, "Good, that's where the real work begins. Your shadow waits in the basement, and now, archetypes hover above you, pulling strings like constellations in the night sky." The question is whether you'll keep dancing unconsciously or start learning the choreography on your own terms. You've seen the masks you wear. You've glimpsed the stranger in the basement. You've noticed the ancient scripts tugging at your sleeves. And now, Jung nudges you toward the strangest messenger of all, your dreams. Dreams are the late night email inbox of your unconscious, except you don't get to unsubscribe, and they almost never make sense. You wake up muttering, "Why was I climbing a staircase made of pizza slices?" while my childhood dog yelled at me in Latin. And then you shrug it off, because who has time to decode that before coffee? Jung, however, leaned in close. He believed dreams were coded messages, telegrams from the shadow and the archetypes, hand-delivered while your conscious mind was too tired to argue. Here's a historical fact. Ancient Egyptians took dreams so seriously that they had dream books cataloguing common visions. If you dreamed of teeth falling out, they believed it foretold death in the family. Greeks even built temples where you could sleep to receive healing visions from the gods. Humanity has always suspected that dreams weren't just nighttime nonsense. Jung simply gave the suspicion a more scientific stage and the quirky detail. Jung himself once dreamed of a house with many floors, from a bright and civilized upper story down to a dark basement full of bones. He interpreted it as a map of his own psyche, the conscious mind upstairs, the collective unconscious in the cellar. That dream actually shaped the entire framework of his psychology. Imagine building your career on a single spooky nap. Now think of your own dreams. They may not make sense in the morning, but they carry emotional weight. Flying dreams often show up when you feel liberated. Drowning dreams when you're overwhelmed. The falling teeth nightmare, the one that makes you wake up licking your gums, Jung would say, points to anxiety about losing control or identity. Of course, historians still argue whether dream analysis is profound psychology or just horoscope level guesswork, but Jung would remind you, even if the symbols aren't scientific, they matter if they matter to you. What's really sinister, though, is how often you ignore them. Dreams don't shout, they whisper. They try to slip you warnings, little puzzle pieces, before your daytime autopilot takes over. And if you don't listen, they escalate. The ignored message comes back in anxiety, in burnout, in that sick feeling you get when you realize you're on the wrong path. It's like your unconscious sending overdue notices until you finally pay attention. Imagine lying here now, half asleep, half awake, letting today's images flicker in your mind. The memory of an awkward conversation, the unfinished work email, the sound of someone's laughter you couldn't get out of your head. All of these might be tonight's building blocks. In your dream, they'll twist into metaphors. That awkward conversation might become a bear chasing you. That email might morph into a tidal wave. That laughter might echo in an empty cathedral. Ridiculous, yes, but also revealing. And here's the strange part. Jung didn't just interpret dreams. He dialogued with them. He practiced something he called active imagination, basically lucid daydreaming, where he would visualize a dream character and then talk to it. Why are you here? What do you want? He treated these figures as parts of himself, messengers he couldn't afford to ignore. You might think that sounds suspiciously like talking to yourself in the shower, but to Jung, it was the key to not wasting your life, because if you never listen to those inner whispers, you drift endlessly in the daylight, chasing tasks that don't matter, while the real story plays out behind your closed eyes. So, as your body sinks heavier into the mattress, and your breath evens out, imagine that tonight your dreams are not just chaos, they're your shadow waving, your archetypes, performing, your forgotten self knocking softly, saying, please, for once, don't waste this message. You've been drifting along, but something always happens eventually. Jung said it often strikes around middle age, though feel it earlier, like an earthquake deep under the sea that sends small ripples long before the tidal wave arrives. The technical term is the midlife crisis, but Jung didn't see it as just a cliché about buying a red sports car or dyeing your hair neon green. He saw it as the psyche demanding a total rewrite of the script. Up to this point, you've played the roles handed to you: student, employee, parent, loyal citizen, maybe even the fun friend who knows the best takeout spots. But at some point, the mask grows stiff, the archetypes feel like old reruns, and the shadow bangs louder on the basement door. You wake up one morning and realize the life you've built isn't exactly yours, it's just scaffolding. That's when the earthquake hits. A historical fact: the term midlife crisis was coined in 1965 by psychologist Elliot Jaques. But Jung had already described the phenomenon decades earlier, calling it a confrontation with the unconscious. He noticed patients in their 40s and 50s falling into despair because they failed, but because they succeeded, they climbed the ladder only to find it leaning against the wrong wall. The quirky detail: Jung himself experienced his earthquake. After his dramatic break with Freud, he was in his late 30s, suddenly cut off from the intellectual father figure who had dominated his career. Instead of running from the collapse, he plunged into visions and painted surreal mandalas. In a sense, his midlife crisis produced the core of his life's work. Imagine that, your breakdown becoming your legacy, and you're not immune. Maybe you've already felt it. In those nights when you lie awake calculating years lost and years left. Or in that sudden, absurd jealousy when you see a teenager playing guitar in the subway and think, I could have done that if I hadn't stopped. The unconscious doesn't care about politeness. It throws its demands like bricks through your carefully polished windows. Historians still argue whether this crisis is biologically inevitable, hormones declining, mortality looming, or whether it's just cultural. The modern burden of too many choices. But either way, the symptoms feel the same: restlessness, dissatisfaction, the gnawing suspicion that the life you're in isn't the one you were meant to live. Here's the paradox: the crisis looks like destruction, but Jung insisted it's an invitation. Your persona begins to crack, yes, but only to let the deeper self push through. It's as if the psyche says, nice job rehearsing everyone else's lines. Now, finally, write your own. Of course, most people panic. They numb it with shopping, alcohol, new partners, or endless busyness. But the crisis isn't fooled. It keeps sending aftershocks until you listen. Picture this: you're walking through your daily routine, same as ever, when suddenly the ground shakes. Cracks zigzag through the pavement, lampposts sway, alarms blare. At first you run for safety, but then you realize it's not the world outside collapsing. It's the world inside demanding to be rebuilt. If you've ever wondered why time feels faster as you age, this is part of the reason. The psyche is rushing you, whispering, don't waste what's left, stop pretending. The crisis is not punishment, it's the soul's alarm clock. So as you lie here, heavy against the pillow, maybe you feel a tremor of your own unfinished dream, a forgotten desire, a nagging sense that something else is waiting. Jung would say, don't ignore the quake. It's your invitation to step off the treadmill and start walking your own road. The earthquake rattles your foundations, and here comes the part that no self-help book puts on the cover. Becoming yourself is messy. Jung called it individuation, which sounds serene and yoga pose worthy, but in practice, it's more like cleaning out a garage that hasn't been opened in 30 years. There's dust, there are spiders, and yes, there's that one box labeled regrets you swore you'd never open. Individuation isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. That means not only polishing your strengths, but also dragging the shadow up from the basement and giving it a seat at the table. It means seeing through your masks, recognizing your archetypes, and saying, okay, fine. I'm complicated, let's deal with it. A historical fact: Jung built a tower for himself at Bollingen, a stone retreat on the shores of Lake Zurich. It wasn't just a vacation house, it was his personal laboratory for individuation. He carved inscriptions into the walls, cooked his own meals, and lived like a medieval monk mixed with an eccentric artist. To him, solitude and stonework were ways of building not just walls, but also a soul. And here's the quirky bit: Jung added new sections to the tower every time he felt he'd entered a new phase of life. It was like architectural autobiography, his psyche literally expanding in stone. Imagine if your apartment walls grew every time you learned something about yourself. You'd either live in a palace by now, or in a terrifying labyrinth of unfinished corridors. But you don't have to carve rocks to start individuating. You just have to stop running from the contradictions. You think you're responsible, but part of you craves recklessness. You want intimacy, but another part longs for solitude. You play the role of the calm adult, but somewhere inside, a sulky teenager still throws tantrums. Individuation means letting these parts speak instead of stuffing them into closets. Historians still argue whether Jung's method was science or spiritual mysticism disguised in psychological jargon. But even skeptics admit this. Confronting your inner mess tends to produce more honesty than pretending it isn't there. The hard truth. Individuation is hilarious in its awkwardness. You might start journaling and discover that half your thoughts read like bad poetry. You might try meditation and realize your brain is basically a circus on caffeine. You might try reconnecting with childhood hobbies and end up finger painting like a toddler. Jung would shrug and say, "Good, keep going, because the point isn't to look dignified, it's to be alive." Think of the caterpillar's transformation. It doesn't calmly stretch its wings in the cocoon. It dissolves into goo. That's individuation, dissolving into psychic goo, so something more authentic can take shape. So tonight, as your breathing slows and the rhythm of sleep presses closer, don't picture individuation as enlightenment. Picture it as you, in sweatpants, sorting through mismatched socks of the psyche. It's clumsy, it's slow, but every sock paired, every box opened, every dust-covered piece acknowledged, is a step away from wasting your life. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to stop pretending. Perfection is the goal. If individuation feels new and radical, Jung would remind you that the search for wholeness has been going on since the first humans sat by firelight and wondered why their dreams felt more real than daylight. Long before psychology became a discipline, people groped toward integration through myths, rituals, and experiments that look strange to us now, but carried the same intent: to stitch the fragmented self together. Take the shamans. A historical fact: in Siberia, shamans performed rituals involving drums, chants, and trance journeys, where they descended into underworlds or soared into skies. To outsiders, it might have looked like madness. To them, it was a way of confronting hidden parts of reality, both external and internal. Shamans were, in Jung's eyes, the original depth psychologists, pulling symbols from the unconscious before Freud or Jung had names for them. Or consider the alchemists. In medieval Europe, they labored over furnaces, trying to turn base metals into gold. Quirky detail. They often failed spectacularly, producing weird powders and smelly liquids instead of treasure. But Jung read their dusty treatises and saw metaphor. For him, alchemy wasn't really about gold, it was about transforming the self. The lead of unconscious confusion cooks slowly until it became the gold of self-knowledge. He believed those cryptic symbols, dragons, flasks, and the philosopher's stone, were really codes for the individuation process. Even monks in cloisters carried pieces of this puzzle. They battled their inner demons, fasted, prayed, and wrestled with doubt. Historians still argue whether these practices produced genuine psychological integration or simply repression with fancy robes. Yet, when you strip away the religious vocabulary, the core was similar: how to unite the fractured human experience into something coherent. And what about you? You may not chant around a fire or stir potions in a smoky lab, but your search is no less old. Every time you journal, every time you dream of quitting your job to paint, every time you feel both despair and hope in the same breath, you are echoing the shamans and alchemists. The modern world calls itself development, but it's the same ancient hunger to become whole. The funny thing is how often history forgot these seekers. We tell school children about kings and battles, not about the mystics muttering over symbols in candlelight. And yet, maybe it's their quiet work that truly kept humanity sane. The soldiers built empires, the mystics kept souls from disintegrating. Without them, we'd be a civilization of masks only, never bothering to peek underneath. So tonight, as the dark presses closer around you, Imagine yourself sitting at that long human table, a Siberian shaman drumming beside you, a medieval alchemist coughing over smoke, a monk whispering a prayer. Jung sits there too, nodding, saying, "See, you're not the first to feel lost." The search for self is as old as the stars, and, perhaps the most comforting thought of all, if they could stumble forward in their strange ways, maybe you can too. You've seen how others before you stumbled through strange rituals, trying to find themselves. But here's the trap Jung warned about, the seduction of certainty. When the unconscious feels messy and frightening, you naturally look for something neat to cling to. A system, a belief, a leader who says, "Follow me," and all will be solved. It feels safe, doesn't it? To let someone else hold the map. That's why ideologies spread so easily. Political slogans, religious absolutes, even the glossy promises of self-help gurus. They whisper, "Don't worry about your messy inner world. Just believe, and the chaos will vanish." A historical fact. In the early 20th century, whole nations fell into this trap. Jung watched Europe collapse into fascism and communism, and he believed part of the reason was psychological. People were so terrified of uncertainty, so unwilling to meet their shadows, that they projected them outward onto scapegoats, enemies, or utopian fantasies. Instead of integrating themselves, they dissolved into the collective. And here's the quirky detail. Jung once said that reading too much philosophy gave him migraines, but reading fairy tales never did. Why? Because philosophy often promised rigid systems, while myths left space for ambiguity. Jung trusted stories more than isms, because stories admitted life was messy. And you know the temptation well. Think about the times you've latched onto a neat plan. If I just follow this diet, this productivity hack, this 5-step method, everything will finally click. For a while it feels good, like slipping into a warm bath, but sooner or later, the bath grows cold. The neat system doesn't account for your quirks, your shadow, your contradictions. Certainty becomes a straitjacket. Historians still argue whether Jung himself avoided this temptation. Some accuse him of dabbling too much in mysticism, turning psychology into its own kind of cult. Others defend him as a man who simply refused to pretend life was simple. Either way, the lesson is the same. Certainty can numb you into wasting your life. And wasting life this way is sneakier than binge-watching TV. At least with TV you know you're procrastinating. But with ideologies and self-help cliches, you feel productive, you feel righteous. All the while, your authentic self is quietly withering because you outsource the hard work of thinking. Here's a picture for you. You're standing at a carnival, and one booth is shouting, "Guaranteed answers, no confusion, step right up." Another booth is quieter, with a hand-painted sign, "Uncertainty and shadows. No refunds." The crowd rushes to the first booth, of course. But Jung would grab your arm and steer you toward the second. Because that's where real life begins, not with certainty, but with the courage to live without it. So tonight, as your eyelids droop heavier and your breath evens out, remind yourself, the goal isn't to find a system that erases your complexity. The goal is to keep walking even when the path is tangled. Certainty is tempting, but becoming your true self requires enduring the mystery. The seduction of certainty fades, but what replaces it isn't peace, it's resistance. You want to change, to become more authentic, to stop wasting your life. But there's a voice inside that hisses, "Don't you dare." Jung understood this as the classic image in myth, the dragon at the gate. Before you can claim your treasure, your real self, you have to fight the beast that guards it. Dragons show up everywhere, a historical fact. In Mesopotamian myth, the storm god Marduk slays the dragon Tiamat, carving her body into the heavens and the earth. In Christian legend, St. George thrusts his spear into a serpent to save a town. Jung noticed these stories weren't about external monsters. They were metaphors for the internal battle between the safe, shallow self that wants to keep performing, and the deeper, riskier self that wants to live, and the quirky part. Jung himself was terrified of his own inner dragon. When he dove into his Red Book experiments, he often encountered terrifying figures, a massive snake, a laughing devil, a blood-soaked prophet. He didn't try to banish them. He spoke to them, recorded their words, and even thanked them. Imagine fighting your nightmares not with a sword, but with a notebook and a fountain pen. Your dragon, of course, wears different scales. Maybe it looks like procrastination, keeping you from writing the book, launching the project, or even calling that old friend. Maybe it's fear of rejection, coiled around your throat every time you imagine being vulnerable. Or maybe it's the comfort of routine, whispering, "Stay here, where it's safe, where you don't have to risk anything real." Historians still argue whether myths of dragons were inspired by actual crocodiles and serpents, or whether they emerged purely as symbols. But to Jung, the biology didn't matter. What mattered was that across every culture, humans imagine monsters blocking their path, which suggests the monster isn't out there, it's in you. And here's the danger. If you refuse to face the dragon, you end up circling the gate forever. Wasting your life doesn't usually mean doing nothing. It means staying busy with everything, except the fight that matters. You organize your sock drawer, clean your inbox, scroll through endless headlines, all while the dragon smirks, knowing you'll never step forward. But what happens when you do? When you take one shaky step toward the gate, sword or pen in hand? Something remarkable. The dragon often shrinks. The task you avoided isn't as deadly as you thought. The rejection letter stings, but it doesn't kill you. The shadow snarls, but it also hands you back lost pieces of yourself. You realize that the treasure wasn't guarded at all, it was waiting for you to notice it. Picture yourself tonight, lying in the half-dark, your breath slow, your heart steady. Imagine the dragon at the edge of your bed, not a fire-breathing monster, but the embodiment of everything you've avoided. And then imagine yourself reaching out, not with fear, but with quiet determination. Because Jung's point is simple. The dragon is never slain by someone else. Only you can face it. Only then can you stop wasting your life and step into your own story. You've fought dragons before, even if you didn't notice. Every time you pushed through resistance, finished a project you dreaded, had the uncomfortable conversation, chose honesty over convenience, you took a swing at the gatekeeper. But Jung would lean in and whisper, "There's another enemy you rarely confront. Time itself. Time isn't just the ticking clock on the wall or the calendar filling with appointments. Time is your real currency, the only one you can turn back. Once it's spent, you waste money, you can make more. You waste energy, you can rest. But waste years and they're gone. No refund policy, no hidden reserves in the basement. A historical fact. The ancient Romans carved sundials with grim inscriptions. One of them read, "I count only the sunny hours." Another said, "It is later than you think." They lived with time not as a background hum, but as an active reminder of mortality. They knew that every wasted day was a debt that could never be repaid. The quirky detail. Jung carried a pocket watch that had belonged to his grandfather. Reminder that the hours ticked not just for him but through him, from one generation to the next. He once admitted that when he held it, he felt the weight of ancestral time pressing on him, urging him to make his life count. Imagine checking your watch not for the next meeting, but for the echo of centuries asking, "What are you doing with this moment?" And you know the feeling of wasted time too well. The endless scrolling that leaves you empty. The just one more episode that becomes 3. The way you tell yourself you'll start tomorrow, and then next week, and then maybe when. Life feels easier. But here's the quiet tragedy. Tomorrow never arrives. Life is always urgent, always chaotic, always inconvenient. If you wait for the perfect time, you'll die waiting. Historians still argue whether our age is uniquely plagued by distraction, or whether humans have always wasted their lives with trivialities. Ancient poets complained about gossip and theatre. Medieval monks complained about laziness and daydreaming. Maybe it's always been hard to stay awake. But your distractions are faster, shinier, more relentless than ever. And that makes the fight with time even more brutal. What Jung wanted you to realize is that wasting time isn't about laziness. It's about refusing the demands of your soul. When you don't write the story you're aching to tell, when you don't take the risk of love, when you don't step into your own life, you're not just procrastinating. You're betraying yourself. And betrayal leaves scars, years from now. When you look back, you won't regret the shows you missed or the meetings you skipped. You'll regret the moments you didn't claim, the hours you gave away to nothing. Jung called this failure to individuate a kind of slow death. You keep breathing, but the essence of you never arrives. So tonight, as you listen to the hush of the room and the faint rhythm of your own pulse, imagine time not as a cruel master, but as a quiet companion sitting at your bedside. It doesn't scold you. It doesn't threaten you. It simply asks, with infinite patience, how will you spend me tomorrow? You've seen time as the ultimate currency, ticking away while you stall at the gate. But here's the good news. Once you've wrestled with shadows, masks, archetypes, dragons, and the weight of hours, something unexpected slips back into your life. Playfulness, joy, the part of you that got buried under adulthood's seriousness begins to stir again. Jung believed individuation wasn't supposed to make you grim and solemn. Quite the opposite. Integration brings back the childlike self, not childishness, but the open-eyed wonder you once had before you were told to act your age. When you stop wasting energy on pretending, hiding, and numbing, you suddenly have energy left for laughter. A historical fact. Friedrich Nietzsche, a philosopher Jung admired, once wrote that maturity means rediscovering the seriousness we had as children at play. You knew it instinctively once, the way hours vanished building Lego castles or scribbling dragons in notebooks. Then life convinced you that play was frivolous. Jung insisted, no, it's the opposite. It's the doorway back to the soul. And here's the quirky detail. Jung had an enormous collection of toy soldiers. He admitted that in moments of stress, he would play with them, arranging little battles across the floor of his study. The world might have seen a world-famous psychiatrist, but inside, he was still a boy building secret kingdoms. Instead of shame, he saw this as vital proof that he hadn't suffocated the playful self. And what about you? Maybe your play has been reduced to sarcasm at the office or ironic memes online. Maybe the real joy got buried under responsibility and performance. But if you listen closely, you can feel it waiting. That itch to dance badly in the kitchen, to try painting even if it looks like mud, to laugh until your ribs ache. Jung would tell you, these aren't distractions, they're signs that the true self is alive. Historians still argue whether Jung's emphasis on symbols and play was genius or indulgence. Was he pioneering psychology or just an eccentric man avoiding grown-up responsibilities? Maybe both. But the lesson holds. When you reconnect with play, you stop wasting life by living only in survival mode. Here's the paradox. Play is not opposed to seriousness, it's what makes seriousness bearable. You can face your shadows, fight your dragons, acknowledge time's cruelty, and still blow bubbles in the backyard. In fact, you must, otherwise the whole project of individuation collapses into solemn self-importance. So as you lie here tonight, feel the heaviness in your limbs, the seriousness of the day fading. Imagine your younger self slipping into the room, carrying crayons, or a soccer ball, or a plastic sword. They don't want to fight, they want to play. And maybe the best sign you're no longer wasting your life is that you smile, reach out, and join them. The playful self has returned, tugging at your sleeve with crayons and laughter. But here's something Jung wanted you to know. You don't walk this path alone. Individuation feels solitary, you versus your shadow, your dreams, your dragon, but no human being ever fully travels without companions. The truth is, Even your deepest inner work is braided with others. Look back across history. Every seeker left behind fragments, not just for themselves, but for you. A historical fact: when Jung was studying in Zurich, he read texts from medieval mystics and Renaissance alchemists, filling his notebooks with their half-crazed diagrams and cryptic prayers. He admitted he sometimes felt less like an original thinker and more like a link in a long chain. Each generation scribbles notes for the next, even if they don't know who will read them. The quirky detail: Jung often wrote in a style so sprawling and confusing that even his students admitted they sometimes had no idea what he was talking about. He once confessed, half amused, that his own writings baffled him when he reread them years later. Imagine writing entire volumes that confuse even the author, proof that even geniuses wobble. It makes him oddly relatable, doesn't it? Like a blogger rambling at 2 a.m., unsure if anyone out there will care. And this is where your loneliness softens, because you realize others are wrestling too. The co-worker who seems so polished is probably cracking inside. The stranger posting filtered photos might be haunted by their own shadow. The neighbors you nod to each morning also running late for their dragons. The illusion of isolation is strong, but in truth, we're all stumbling toward ourselves. Together, historians still argue whether Jung's theories hold up under modern neuroscience, or if they belong more to literature than psychology. But whether the science sticks or not, the human need he pointed to is undeniable. We crave recognition. To be seen, not just as performers in masks, but as whole people in progress. So here you are, stretched out in the dark, but not as alone. As you feel, others across the city, across the globe, are lying down at this same hour, also wondering whether they've wasted their days, also hoping tomorrow will bring more authenticity. You can almost imagine a secret community of night wanderers, whispering the same questions into the quiet. And maybe that's enough for now. To know that even if the individuation is personal, it isn't solitary. You belong to a chorus of restless souls, each trying, failing, laughing, playing, and continuing anyway. The chorus fades, and now it's just you again, your body heavy, your thoughts softened, your breath steady. Jung would say, this is the moment to begin walking the quiet road home. Not the road of applause, not the road of borrowed roles, but the simple path where every step is your own. The temptation is always to make life a performance. You want to impress, to prove, to collect gold stars from teachers, bosses, strangers on the internet. But performances end, the audience leaves, and you're left staring at an empty stage. Jung's point was never to stop playing roles. Society demands some of that, but to stop mistaking the roles for your soul. A historical fact: in his later years, Jung retreated often to Bollingen Tower, sitting by the fireplace, carving strange symbols into stone, and writing in near silence. Visitors described him as peaceful, almost weathered into the landscape itself. He had become, at least partly, the man he'd been seeking all along, not perfect, not free of contradictions, but whole enough to sit in his own skin without flinching. The quirky detail: Jung used to light bonfires at the tower and dance around them in robes, performing little rituals no one quite understood. Imagine a world-renowned psychiatrist hopping around flames like a medieval wizard, chuckling to himself. It sounds absurd, but maybe absurdity was the point. He no longer cared how it looked. He had given himself permission to live. And that's the invitation to you now. To let tomorrow be less about wasting hours on autopilot, and more about small steps toward yourself. You don't have to revolutionize everything in one day. Jung would laugh at that pressure, but you can peel off one mask, listen to one dream, face one dragon, reclaim one forgotten joy. Each choice bends the road back toward home. Historians still argue whether Jung's psychology belongs to science, religion, or art. But maybe that's fitting. Life itself refuses to fit neatly into categories, and neither do you. You are not a machine to be optimized. You are a mystery to be unfolded, slowly, imperfectly, honestly. So as you lie here, the hum of the night around you, imagine the quiet road stretching out before you, no spotlight, no audience, just your footsteps, steady and unhurried, leading you not toward some grand destiny, but simply toward the one life that was always waiting for you, your own. The night has carried you far, and now we slow down. Thoughts that once raced are softer, more like ripples and waves. You've seen masks slip, shadows stir, dragons breathe, and archetypes guide your steps. You've noticed how time presses against you, and how play returns when you stop wasting yourself on performance. Through all of it, Jung's whisper remains the same. Life is not about perfection, but wholeness. Wholeness is gentler than you think. It isn't about conquering every fear or solving every riddle. It's about letting your contradictions live side by side, your strength and your weakness, your confidence and your doubt, your laughter and your grief. When you allow them all a seat at the table, the noise quiets, and the scattered pieces of you begin to hum in harmony. Maybe tomorrow you'll still procrastinate. Maybe you'll still check your phone too many times. Maybe you'll still wear the polite mask longer than you'd like. That's fine. The point isn't to win every battle in one night. The point is to notice, to remember that your soul is calling you back again and again to the road of yourself. So let the day go now. Let the unfinished tasks, the nagging voices, the shadows in the corner dissolve into the softness of sleep. You've walked far tonight, and the path home is quiet, safe, and slow. Tomorrow will come, with its distractions and demands, but also with its opportunities to live more truly, even in small ways, and maybe that's enough to wake up knowing. You don't have to waste your life pretending. You can walk your road imperfect, playful, whole. Good night, and sweet dreams. *.